December 7th, 1941, EOSO 6:30 hours. Tula Arms Factory, Soviet Union. Lieutenant General Georgy Shpagin stood in the freezing assembly hall, watching his breath form clouds in the -20-degree air as he examined the crude weapon in his hands. Around him, workers wearing fingerless gloves and wool caps rushed to complete the latest batch of submachine guns, their movements urgent under the dim yellow glow of industrial bulbs. The weapon felt impossibly light, almost toy-like, with its simple stamped steel construction and rough wooden stock. Cost to produce, 18 American dollars. Stalin's exact words when he first held one 3 months earlier echoed in Shpagin's mind. "This looks like something a peasant would make in his basement. Are you trying to make me a laughingstock?" What Stalin didn't know yet was that this peasant weapon would become the most produced submachine gun in human history and would literally save the Soviet Union from complete annihilation. The story begins not with grand strategy or brilliant engineering, but with desperation so complete that it drove an entire nation to embrace mediocrity as excellence. By December 1941, the German Wehrmacht had penetrated nearly to Moscow's suburbs, capturing or destroying virtually every major Soviet arms manufacturing facility west of the Urals. The Red Army had lost over 3 million men in 6 months, along with thousands of tanks, aircraft, and nearly their entire stockpile of small arms. What remained were scattered factories, hastily relocated workers with minimal training, and a leader who understood that quantity, not quality, would determine whether the Soviet Union survived the next 12 months. In this context, the PPSH-41 submachine gun wasn't just a weapon. It was a mathematical solution to an existential equation where time multiplied by simplicity equaled survival. Georgy Shpagin was not a weapons designer by training. He was a mechanical engineer who had spent his career designing agricultural equipment, specifically hay-cutting machines for collective farms. His transition to weapons design came purely by accident when the Tula Arms Factory, desperate for any available engineering talent, pulled him from a rural machinery plant in 1940. His first assignment was to examine captured German MP-40 submachine guns and figure out how to mass-produce something similar with Soviet industrial capabilities. What he discovered horrified him. The German weapons were masterpieces of precision manufacturing, requiring specialized tooling, high-grade steel, and skilled machinists. The Soviet Union in 1941 had none of these luxuries. They had stamping presses designed for making cooking pots, workers whose previous experience involved assembling tractors, and steel that was often recycled from destroyed buildings. Shpagin's genius was recognizing that these limitations weren't obstacles, they were design parameters. The original German MP-40 cost approximately $65 to manufacture and required 47 hours of skilled labor to complete. Shpagin's PPSH-41 required 13 hours of unskilled labor and cost $18 in materials. The difference wasn't just economic, it was philosophical. While German engineers pursued perfection, Soviet engineers pursued adequacy at massive scale. The PPSH-41's receiver was made from 2 pieces of stamped steel welded together like a soup can. The barrel was basic carbon steel, sometimes so rough that soldiers had to file down burrs before first use. The wooden stock was often green wood that would warp and crack in winter temperatures. The drum magazine, holding 71 rounds, was notorious for jamming if not loaded exactly right. By every measure of traditional weapons manufacturing, the PPSH-41 was substandard. By every measure of wartime effectiveness, it was exactly what the Red Army needed. Stalin's first encounter with the weapon occurred during a factory inspection in September 1941, just weeks before the Germans reached Moscow's outskirts. According to records from the Central Committee archives, preserved in Moscow's State Historical Museum, Stalin arrived unannounced at the Tula factory during the midnight shift. Workers later described the scene as surreal. Stalin, wearing his characteristic military-style jacket and cap, walked through the production line accompanied by a small entourage of nervous officials. When he reached Shpagin Station, the engineer handed him the latest prototype. Stalin hefted the weapon, examined the crude welds, knocked on the stamped steel receiver, and spoke the words that would become factory legend. "This looks like something a peasant would make in his basement. Are you trying to make me a laughing stock?" The silence in the factory was complete. Workers stopped their machines. The only sound was the distant rumble of German artillery, growing closer each day. Shpagin's response, documented in his personal diary found in 1991, was calculated and desperate. "Comrade Stalin, I can make you one perfect gun in a month, or 1,000 imperfect guns in a week. The Germans are 30 kilometers away. Which do you prefer?" Stalin's reply was immediate. "Show me the 1,000. What happened next transformed not just Soviet weapons production, but the entire concept of wartime manufacturing. Within 48 hours, Stalin had ordered every available stamping press in the Soviet Union converted to PPSH-41 production. Furniture factories began making wooden stocks. Automobile plants started stamping receivers. Even kitchen appliance manufacturers were repurposed to produce magazines. The distributed production system meant that bombing any single facility couldn't stop PPSH-41 production, because PPSH-41 production was everywhere. The weapon's first major combat test came during the Battle of Moscow in December 1941, when entire Soviet infantry regiments armed with PPSH-41s engaged German forces in close quarters urban combat. Lieutenant Pavel Volkov of the 316th Rifle Division, writing to his wife in a letter preserved in the Central Armed Forces Museum, described the weapon's performance. "The new gun shoots like a sewing machine, very fast, very loud, not very accurate beyond 50 meters. But in these ruined buildings, 50 meters is a long shot. The Germans have beautiful weapons that fire single shots very precisely. We have ugly weapons that fire many shots very quickly. In a basement or a stairwell, ugly wins." Soviet after-action reports from December 1941 show that regiments equipped with PPSH-41s had significantly higher survival rates in urban combat compared to units armed with traditional rifles. The key to the PPSH-41's battlefield success wasn't its engineering excellence, it was its psychological impact on both user and target. Soviet soldiers, many of whom had never used automatic weapons, found the massive firepower intoxicating. A single soldier with a loaded 71-round drum could lay down more firepower than an entire squad with bolt-action rifles. This dramatically improved morale among troops who had spent months retreating and taken massive casualties. Conversely, German soldiers found the intense volume of Soviet fire deeply unsettling. German field reports from early 1942, captured and translated by Soviet intelligence, repeatedly mention the psychological effect of facing Russian machine gun squads armed with what were actually individual submachine guns. If you want to discover how an $18 weapon changed the course of the deadliest war in human history, please leave your like on this video. This helps us share more forgotten stories like this one. And subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, so you don't miss the next episodes. We rescue stories like this from dusty archives every single day. By spring 1942, the PPSH-41 had become the standard weapon for Soviet assault troops, tank crews, and any unit expected to engage in close combat. Production numbers tell the story of this transformation. In 1941, Soviet factories produced approximately 90 PPSH-41s. In 1942, production jumped to 15 million. By 1943, the peak production year, Soviet factories were completing over 3 PPSH-41s every single day. To put this in perspective, the Germans produced approximately 1 million MP40s during the entire war. The Soviets produced over 6 million PPSH-41s. The mathematical advantage was overwhelming. German units increasingly found themselves outgunned not by superior technology, but by superior numbers of adequate technology. The weapon's distributed production system created an interesting secondary effect. Because PPSH-41 components were manufactured in hundreds of different facilities across the Soviet Union, no two guns were exactly identical. Workers in different factories developed their own modifications and improvements. Tank crews added front grips for easier handling in confined spaces. Paratroopers developed folding stock variants. Arctic units created extended triggers that could be operated while wearing thick gloves. This organic evolution meant that the PPSH-41 continuously improved throughout the war, not through formal design updates, but through battlefield necessity and worker innovation. The smell of gun oil and metal shavings filled the air as Sergeant Major Dmitry Kozlov field-stripped his PPSH-41 in a bombed-out factory outside Stalingrad. His hands, blackened with grime and motor oil, moved automatically through the familiar routine as mortar shells exploded in the distance. The weapon had jammed twice during the morning's fighting, forcing him to clear stuck cases with his bayonet. The receiver showed multiple dents from shrapnel, and the wooden stock had a crack running from the butt to the pistol grip. By any reasonable standard, the gun should have been replaced weeks ago, but replacement weapons didn't exist in Stalingrad in October 1942. You maintained what you had, improved it when possible, and made it work until it killed you or the enemy. Kozlov's PPSH-41, serial number 4127834, had been with him since the retreat from Ukraine 8 months earlier. It had fired an estimated 12 rounds, been underwater twice, frozen solid in Ukrainian winters, and used as a club when ammunition ran out. It still functioned. German technical intelligence reports from 1943, discovered in Wehrmacht archives after the war, reveal grudging respect for Soviet weapons production philosophy. One report, filed by Oberst Heinrich Müller of the German Army Weapons Office, stated, "Soviet small arms are crude but effective. Their apparent disregard for finish and precision allows massive production quantities that we cannot match. A single Soviet factory produces more submachine guns in 1 month than our entire program produces in 6 months. We are being overwhelmed not by superior engineering, but by superior mathematics." This realization led to several German attempts to copy Soviet production methods, but German industrial culture proved incompatible with good enough manufacturing. German workers and engineers couldn't psychologically accept producing weapons they considered substandard, even when substandard weapons produced quickly were strategically superior to excellent weapons produced slowly. The PPSH-41's influence extended far beyond Soviet borders. Captured weapons were eagerly adopted by German troops, who appreciated the superior firepower despite their officers' disapproval. Finnish forces, allied with Germany but facing Soviet attacks, began producing their own version called the Suomi KP-44, which was essentially a PF-SH-41 with minor modifications. Resistance fighters across occupied Europe coveted captured PPSH-41s because the weapons were robust enough to function after months of burial or hiding, and ammunition was often available from captured Soviet supplies. The gun's simplicity meant that partisans with minimal technical knowledge could maintain and repair the weapons using basic tools. How many of you have a grandfather, father, or uncle who served and never talked about what they experienced? These stories are disappearing. Leave a comment now saying just, "My grandfather served," or "My father served." When you comment, you're not just honoring your family, you're preserving memory for the next generations. Let's create a living memorial here in the comments. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the PPSH-41 story is what happened when the weapon encountered its creator's original inspiration. In July 1943, during the massive tank battle at Kursk, Soviet and German forces engaged in close-quarters combat throughout the rolling countryside south of Moscow. Soviet infantry, armed primarily with PPSH-41s, faced German assault troops equipped with MP-40s, the very weapons that Stalin had originally tried to copy. The engagement provided a perfect test case for competing design philosophies. German troops, carrying weapons that cost 3.5 times more to produce and represented far superior craftsmanship, found themselves consistently outgunned by Soviet soldiers with crude, mass-produced weapons. The difference wasn't individual weapon performance, it was tactical mathematics. Soviet squads could maintain continuous fire while German squads had to carefully conserve ammunition. Soviet commanders could accept weapon losses and quickly re-equip units because replacement weapons were abundant. German commanders had to preserve every weapon because replacement weapons were scarce. Soviet weapons production records, declassified in 1991, reveal the stunning scale of PPSH-41 manufacturing during the war's peak years. At maximum production in 1943, Soviet factories were completing one PPSH-41 every 28 seconds, 24 hours a day. This required approximately 847 different workers across 312 different facilities. The steel requirements alone consumed nearly 15% of total Soviet wartime steel production. The distributed manufacturing system meant that even massive German bombing raids couldn't significantly impact PPSH-41 production. When the Luftwaffe destroyed the main Tula factory in March 1943, PPSH-41 production actually increased the following month as undamaged facilities expanded their operations to compensate. The weapon's role in specific battles demonstrates its strategic importance beyond simple firepower statistics. During the siege of Leningrad, PPSH-41s became essential for urban warfare in the city's narrow streets and bombed buildings. The weapon's high rate of fire and large ammunition capacity made it ideal for the quick engagements and rapid movement that characterized urban combat. Leningrad defenders, writing in diaries later collected by the city's Museum of Defense and Siege, repeatedly mentioned the psychological comfort of carrying enough bullets to kill everything in sight. This confidence, however illusory, contributed significantly to the defenders' ability to maintain morale during nearly 900 days of siege. Technical analysis of surviving PPSH-41s, conducted by weapons historians in the 1990s, reveals the impressive durability that resulted from the weapon's crude construction methods. The heavy stamped steel receiver, while rough and unprofessional in appearance, proved remarkably resistant to damage. The simple operating mechanism, with fewer precision-manufactured components than comparable weapons, actually increased reliability under battlefield conditions. Captured German test reports from 1944 show that PPSH-41s continued functioning after tests that disabled more sophisticated weapons. The irony was complete. Weapons built to the lowest acceptable standard proved more durable than weapons built to the highest possible standard. Stalin's final assessment of the PPSH-41 came during a Kremlin meeting in January 1945, as Soviet forces advanced toward Berlin. General Ivan Serov, writing in his classified memoir published after the Cold War, documented Stalin's words, "I was wrong about Shpagin's gun. I thought it looked like peasant work. I was right. It was peasant work. That's why it won." This statement encapsulated the deeper lesson of the PPSH-41 story. Soviet victory didn't come from superior technology or brilliant strategy. It came from accepting that adequate solutions implemented at massive scale could defeat excellent solutions implemented at limited scale. The PPSH-41 wasn't better than the German MP-40. There were just 6 times as many of them. The international impact of Soviet mass production philosophy extended far beyond World War II. American weapons designers, studying Soviet methods during the Cold War, incorporated many PPSH-41 concepts into post-war weapon development. The M3 grease gun, developed for U.S. forces in 1944, borrowed heavily from Soviet stamping techniques and simplified manufacturing. Chinese Communist forces, supplied with Soviet weapons during their Civil War, learned the lessons of mass production so well that they eventually outproduced Soviet factories using Soviet methods. The AK-47, developed by Mikhail Kalashnikov in the late 1940s, represented the ultimate evolution of Shpagin's philosophy. Maximum simplicity, maximum durability, maximum production capability. The PPSH-41's influence on modern weapons manufacturing is visible today in every mass-produced military rifle. The acceptance that good enough engineering could be superior to perfectionist engineering revolutionized how militaries think about equipment procurement. Modern military doctrine emphasizes weapons that soldiers can maintain in field conditions using basic tools, rather than weapons that require specialized facilities and trained technicians. This philosophy, born from Shpagin's agricultural engineering background and Stalin's desperate need for quantity over quality, now dominates military thinking worldwide. Every modern assault rifle, from the American M4 to the German G36, incorporates design elements that prioritize manufacturability and field maintenance over theoretical performance. The human cost of the PPSH-41's success provides sobering context for its strategic importance. Soviet factory workers, many of them women and elderly men exempt from military service, worked 12-hour shifts in unheated facilities throughout the war's coldest winters. Factory accident reports, preserved in regional party archives, document hundreds of deaths from exhaustion, hypothermia, and industrial accidents. The mathematical equation that made the PPSH-41 strategically successful, trading quality for quantity, extended to human resources as well. Soviet leadership accepted massive civilian casualties in weapons production because the alternative was complete military defeat. The workers who died producing PPSH-41s were as much war casualties as the soldiers who died using them. German attempts to counter Soviet mass production revealed the fundamental incompatibility between perfectionist and utilitarian manufacturing cultures. In late 1943, desperate German officials ordered their own simplified submachine gun, the MP3008, which was essentially a copy of the British Sten gun. German workers and engineers found the weapon's crude construction so psychologically disturbing that production never achieved significant levels. Quality control inspectors rejected weapons for cosmetic flaws that had no impact on function. Engineers continuously proposed improvements that increased complexity and manufacturing time. The cultural obsession with craftsmanship that had made German engineering legendary proved to be a strategic weakness when quantity became more important than quality. After the war, Georgy Shpagin returned to agricultural machinery design, developing improved hay-cutting equipment for collective farms until his retirement in 1962. He received the Hero of Socialist Labor Award in 1945, but rarely spoke publicly about his wartime work. His personal papers, donated to the Tula State Museum after his death in 1976, reveal a complex relationship with his creation. In a 1960 diary entry, he wrote, "I designed a machine for cutting hay that lasted 40 years. I designed a machine for cutting men that lasted 4 years, but helped save a nation. History will judge which was more important." Shpagin died knowing that his crude $18 weapon had been instrumental in defeating Nazi Germany, but he never fully reconciled this achievement with the massive human cost of both producing and using the weapon. The PPSH-41's post-war career demonstrates the weapon's enduring utility. Soviet forces used PPSH-41s in the Korean War, where American troops encountered them for the first time. U.S. military reports from Korea consistently mention the psychological impact of facing massive volumes of automatic fire from weapons that looked primitive but functioned effectively. Chinese People's Liberation Army units, equipped with Soviet-supplied PPSH-41s, maintained the weapons in service through the 1970s. Vietnamese forces used captured PPSH-41s throughout both the French and American conflicts, appreciating the weapon's durability in tropical conditions that disabled more sophisticated equipment. Even today, PPSH-41s occasionally appear in conflicts across Africa and Asia, testament to the weapon's fundamental reliability. Modern weapons historians consider the PPSH-41 the most influential firearm of the 20th century, not because of its technical specifications, but because of its manufacturing philosophy. The weapon proved that adequate technology produced quickly and cheaply could defeat superior technology produced slowly and expensively. This lesson reshaped military procurement worldwide and influenced fields far beyond weapons manufacturing. Modern consumer electronics, automobiles, and even software development incorporate principles pioneered in Soviet PPSH-41 production. prioritize function over form, accept acceptable quality rather than demanding perfection, and optimize for scale rather than individual excellence. The PPSH-41 story proves that sometimes the best ideas come from people closest to the hardware, not those furthest from it in organizational hierarchies. It proves that challenging conventional wisdom, even at significant risk to career and reputation, can produce results that benefit everyone, and it proves that the right tool delivered at the right moment can change the course of history. Georgy Shpagin's $18 gun saved the Soviet Union not because it was better than alternatives, but because it existed in sufficient numbers when alternatives did not. Sometimes adequate solutions implemented at massive scale defeat, excellent solutions implemented at limited scale. Sometimes peasant work, when applied with mathematical precision to existential problems, produces results that sophisticated engineering cannot match. If this story moved you the same way it moved us, please do us a favor. Leave your like on this video. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about engineers who broke rules to save lives, soldiers who defied the impossible, weapons that changed wars through courage and creativity. Real people, real heroism. Leave a comment now and tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Germany, Russia. Our community extends around the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring that Georgy Shpagin doesn't disappear into silence. These people deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that possible. The mathematical elegance of the PPSH-41 success becomes even more striking when examined through modern production analysis. Contemporary manufacturing experts studying Soviet wartime records have calculated that the distributed production system pioneered for PPSH-41 manufacturing was approximately 40 years ahead of its time. What Soviet engineers achieved through desperate necessity, modern manufacturers now call lean production and just-in-time manufacturing. The concept of accepting variable quality across production batches, then standardizing only critical components, is now taught in business schools as advanced supply chain management. Shpagin and his team, working in freezing factories with minimal resources, accidentally invented manufacturing principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until the 1980s. The weapon's impact on Soviet society extended far beyond military applications. Factory workers who learned mass production techniques building PPSH-41s carried these skills into post-war reconstruction efforts. The same stamping presses used for gun receivers were converted to produce everything from agricultural tools to household appliances. The distributed manufacturing network established for wartime weapons production became the foundation for Soviet industrial expansion in the 1950s and 1960s. Women who had operated PPSH-41 production lines during the war became supervisors and engineers in peacetime industries, bringing with them a pragmatic approach to problem-solving that emphasized results over procedures. In a very real sense, the PPSH-41 production system helped rebuild the Soviet Union after the war ended. International weapons development in the immediate post-war period was dominated by attempts to replicate Soviet mass production success. American ordnance officials studying captured German intelligence reports about Soviet manufacturing, realized that traditional American weapons production was fundamentally inadequate for modern warfare. The U.S. defense industry's focus on precision manufacturing and individual weapon quality made sense for peacetime military forces but proved insufficient for wartime scale requirements. This recognition led directly to development of the M14 rifle, which incorporated stamped components and simplified manufacturing processes borrowed directly from PPSH-41 production methods. British weapons designers, facing similar conclusions about their own manufacturing limitations, developed the L1A1 rifle using techniques learned from studying captured Soviet weapons. The PPSH-41's influence on Cold War military thinking was profound but rarely acknowledged publicly. NATO planning documents from the 1950s, declassified in the 1990s, repeatedly reference the Soviet production advantage when discussing conventional force comparisons. Western military analysts understood that Soviet forces could replace weapons losses at rates that NATO forces could not match. This recognition drove Western military doctrine toward nuclear weapons as equalizers against superior Soviet conventional production capacity. The entire concept of nuclear deterrence was partly based on acknowledgement that the West could not compete with Soviet-style mass production of conventional weapons. The PPSH-41's $18 production cost had strategic implications that lasted decades beyond the weapon's active service life. Technical evolution of the PPSH-41 continued even after official production ended in 1947. Soviet Special Forces units modified existing weapons for specific missions throughout the 1950s and 1960s. KGB archives, partially opened after the Soviet collapse, document PPSH-41 variants equipped with suppressors, folding stocks, and modified triggers for covert operations. These modifications were typically performed in small workshops using hand tools, demonstrating the weapon's fundamental design strength. It could be modified by users rather than requiring factory support. This adaptability made the PPSH-41 ideal for proxy conflicts during the Cold War, when Soviet forces needed weapons that local allies could maintain and modify independently. The psychological impact of the PPSH-41 on German forces provides fascinating insight into the weapon's true effectiveness. German military medical records from 1943-1945, discovered in East German archives after reunification, document increased rates of combat stress disorders among troops facing Soviet forces equipped with automatic weapons. German soldiers, trained to expect disciplined, aimed fire from enemy forces, found the seemingly random spray of Soviet automatic weapons deeply unsettling. Post-war interviews with German veterans consistently mention the distinctive sound of PPSH-41 fire as particularly memorable and frightening. The weapon's crude appearance contributed to this psychological effect. German soldiers couldn't understand how such primitive-looking weapons could be so effective, which undermined their confidence in their own superior equipment. Modern conflict analysis reveals that the PPSH-41's fundamental design principles continue influencing contemporary weapons development. The AK-74, currently Russia's standard military rifle, incorporates manufacturing techniques pioneered in PPSH-41 production. The weapon's polymer components are produced using the same distributed manufacturing philosophy that made PPSH-41 production bomb-resistant during World War II. Chinese Type 95 rifles, American M4 carbines, and European famous rifles all reflect lessons learned from Soviet wartime production. Prioritize reliability over precision, designed for field maintenance rather than factory perfection, and accept variable quality in non-critical components to maximize production speed. The ultimate irony of the PPSH-41 story lies in its post-Cold War assessment by Russian weapons historians. Modern Russian military analysis, conducted with access to previously classified Soviet archives, concludes that the weapon's greatest contribution to Soviet victory was psychological rather than tactical. The knowledge that adequate weapons existed in virtually unlimited quantities gave Soviet commanders confidence to accept losses that would have been strategically devastating for forces equipped with scarce, expensive weapons. Soviet tactical doctrine could emphasize aggressive, high-casualty operations because replacement equipment was guaranteed. German tactical doctrine became increasingly conservative as the war progressed because equipment losses were irreplaceable. The PPSH-41's $18 production cost enabled strategic boldness that expensive weapons could not support. Contemporary weapons collectors and military historians continue discovering PPSH-41s in remarkable conditions around the world. Examples have been found in sealed containers in Siberian caves, apparently preserved for partisan operations that never materialized. African conflicts in the 1980s and 1990s frequently featured PPSH-41s that had been stored in Greece since the 1940s, then successfully returned to service with minimal maintenance. These discoveries reinforce the weapon's reputation for durability, but they also demonstrate the massive scale of Soviet wartime production. Estimates suggest that thousands of PPSH-41s remain in storage or forgotten caches worldwide, testament to production numbers so large that significant quantities simply disappeared into the global arms supply without being formally recorded. The PPSH-41 represents more than just successful weapons design. It embodies a philosophy about technology's role in human conflict that remains relevant today. In an era of increasingly sophisticated and expensive military equipment, Spagin's $18 gun reminds us that effectiveness often matters more than elegance, that quantity can overcome quality, and that the best solution to an immediate problem might be the one that works right now, rather than the one that works perfectly later. Sometimes peasant engineering, applied with mathematical precision and desperate urgency, produces results that sophisticated planning cannot match. Sometimes the crude answer delivered today defeats the perfect answer delivered tomorrow. The PPSH-41's legacy isn't just military. It's a lesson about innovation under pressure, about finding adequacy in scarcity, and about how ordinary people using simple tools can change the course of history when necessity demands extraordinary results.